diving in, there's an agenda. Just so everyone's aware, who am I? So, hey, I'm Scott. These days, I'm a sales coach. I'm a former VP of sales, and sometimes I do some fractional work as well. I accidentally became the sales mastermind. That's a whole nother story. And Hein, who's in this group, he could probably tell it better than I can. But yeah, that was complete accident. And yeah, a bit more about me on there, but also I've been in this group since. Right, it started in 2019, didn't it? Was it 18 or 19? I was trying to remember.
I think it was like end of 18, but
Oh, okay.
I you know, just for context, everyone. So I have a strict SaaS founder only rule. Scott is the exception to that. I asked him to join very early on because he brings a lot of sales expertise to the group, and that was something a lot of people had problems with at the time and continue to have problems with. So Scott is, I guess, probably our first sort of like expert that we brought in to add value to the community. But yeah, that was the background.
Cool. Yeah. I forget because it's the second time I've done that. We always do that disclaimer. But yeah, cool. All right. So let's dive in. So discovery call structure. Fundamentally, I wanted to also give a definition of what actually is discovery. Because if you're brand new to sales, it's right at the beginning. And basically it's a conversation between a buyer and a seller. Ideally, you're actually talking to a buyer. You're not talking to kind of their research assistant or something like that, but sometimes you have to. And the goal is it's two-sided. Well, one of the we'll get to discovery myths in a second, but one of the things that a lot of people think is that it's only one side. It's all about kind of the seller making sure the buyer is okay, or the buyer making sure the seller is just okay. But it very much is two-sided, and usually it's actually more about the seller, which is why we get into kind of the last part of this. So the call structure. This is kind of the call structure I recommend. And the goal is to qualify the buyer while setting the next steps. That's why it's about the seller. And really, it's about, do I want to invest time in this person? Are they worth my effort? Are they actually going to be someone who is willing to move forward and actually buy from me? So I always recommend 30 minutes. You can do this shorter, but just to give you an idea of the structure that I recommend, 30 minutes, start with kind of intro agenda, move to qualification, and we're going to start to answer two of the three questions that we need to get from the buyer's perspective. You got to give them something back as well. So a micro demo, seeding the next steps is a big one, because as much as this is about the seller and confirming they do want to work with the buyer, at the same time, buyer needs to get something out of it as well. Otherwise, they feel jaded and they're kind of like buyers typically hate discovery, and it's kind of a reason for that. Like there is definitely a stigma attached to it. So that micro demo section, that's where you really give back to the buyer, and that's why we put it right at the end. Because there's a lot of kind of emotion and human psychology baked into that. That like if something is rough to begin with, but then it ends really well, no one ever really remembers anything but the ending. So that micro demo, super visual, and I'll go through an actual script towards the end of exactly how I do that. And if you want more, there's a cheat sheet that I put together. The last and most important thing of any discovery call is there are only three outcomes. Either you both buy in and you BAMFAM, which stands for book a meeting from a meeting. Basically, do not end the call without having something in the calendar if you both agree. Reason for that as don't be in the 40%. So when I was VP of sales a couple of years ago, we did the research and we found that of people who don't book a meeting, even a qualified, like great conversation, of those people, all of them say, yep, we love it. 40% of them disappear without further interaction. So what that actually meant when we did the research, it was the sales rep is still reaching out. Sales reps dialing, they're emailing, they're cold link, or not cold, but they're LinkedIning, they're WhatsApping, like whatever it is, they're doing something to get back in touch, and usually all of those things. However, if you don't book the meeting in that meeting, if you don't keep that momentum, 40% of the qualified stuff just disappears completely and they never interact with you again. So that's why it's the most important thing. If both sides buy in, you have to book a meeting from a meeting or you just lose so much great stuff. The other two outcomes is the seller says no and disqualifies the buyer. Yes, you can disqualify a buyer. You can say, I don't want to work with you. I'm sure some people on this call already know that, but you'd be amazed the number of sellers who are like, no, 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 I have to work with every single buyer. And that's one of the biggest things to understand. You do not have to work with every buyer. We'll get to the myths in a second, and I'll walk you through why you want to disqualify early and disqualify often. The other option is the buyer says no and refuses to book a meeting. So you'll notice that's kind of two-part. Buyers almost never actually say no in this call. They just refuse to book a meeting. They refuse to keep that step going. And it's a good test. Is this person actually a buyer? Are they, as I said, like a researcher or someone who's not really in a position of power? Because people not in positions of power don't really know how to say yes. So if they do refuse to BAMFAM, you've kind of got your answer because it's obviously not a big enough problem, or they're not an authority that can actually do something, or it's not really a problem now. Like it's a problem in 2 years' time, but not really a problem now. So those are the only three outcomes that should ever come from a discovery call. And if you go in with the goal in mind and the outcomes in mind, you'll be kind of head and shoulders above the rest because you know what you're actually looking for and you know what success looks like. So if we think about kind of that structure, that's the whole idea. Like, what is the call? What are we doing at each step? Now let's go into the psychology and kind of the background behind it from the seller's side. So I kind of put some discovery myths in place because from a seller's perspective, there's a lot of myths going on. There's a lot of things happening that usually are happening in our heads. And usually this comes from our childhood programming. It comes from when you went, I'll give you a real story. I'm quite tall. I'm 6'6", so I don't fit in many beds. And when I was younger, we were going out to buy a new bed base for a new bed for me. And I can't have like where the feet are, I can't have anything there because even on really large beds, my feet overhang. Um, but what happened was we went to this furniture store. I can't remember what it's called. And the my mum was looking at this one that had some feet on the end of it. And I was trying to tell her, like, hey, no, that's not what we're looking for. And I really wish the salesperson had have asked me as the actual person involved, like, what do you need? What do you want? What's important? Now, admittedly, I was like 12. So like let's not go too crazy. But that's an example of the customer is always right. The final part of that quote is on matters of taste. It's not just the customer is always right. And the whole idea behind that, it was the guy behind Selfridges, which is a British department store. The customer is always right on matters of taste meant if the customer is going to buy an ugly hat, don't stop them buying an ugly hat. Like sell them the hat, even if you think it's ugly. And that's a real example, by the way. Like the Selfridges guy literally talked about hats at one stage. So the customer is not always right. And that's why when you think about discovery, you're thinking about, do I actually want to work with this person from a seller's perspective? Is this someone who is worth going down the process with? Because if you think about, look, we've all had those deals or actually selling someone, and you're just like, our product starts at 100 grand. Like you're a two-person business that's been around for 3 weeks. Chances are you're probably not going to buy this. So even though that particular person is really going to be pushing to really go through the sales process, they're like, yeah, no, we really want this. But like maybe they're right on matters of taste, but there's no way you're actually going to buy from it. So let's kind of get rid of that myth, get rid of the myth that the customer is always right. The second one from a discovery perspective is people think discovery is for the buyer. The buyer thinking, do I want to buy this product? I want to learn a little bit more. It's really not. The amount of information that you're going to have on your website, you're going to have webinars live, you're going to have YouTube videos, content is everywhere. Even if you've only got a small kind of $1, $2, $3 million business, you've had to build a pretty strong content library to compete these days. So there's a lot out there about you. And also most buyers, they're already coming to groups like this. They're already going to Facebook groups or wherever it is that they hang out. And they're asking questions like, hey, we're looking at changing X. These are the 3 companies we're looking at. What do people think? They do that before they ever reach out to you. So the myth of the discovery is for the buyer. Like it kind of is, but really it's more for the seller. and I can't remember if I was meant to do this in this slide or later on, so I'll just do it now. But basically, if you think about discovery from a seller's perspective, what you are trying to work out for a very, very simple sales process in the SaaS world, it's usually a discovery call, it's 30 minutes. There's usually a demo call, which is 30 minutes to an hour. There's usually some sort of quoting or proposal process that takes anywhere from 1 to 2 hours with a 30-minute call to actually present it. So if we break all those down, and there's also a rule of thumb in sales that for every minute face-to-face, you add another minute of prep and emails and research and all those sorts of things. So you've got now we're investing an hour in discovery, 2 hours in the demo, and up to 4 hours preparing all their documentation and quoting and putting something together for them. That's before a buyer ever has to say yes to anything. So we're investing, what was that, 5 hours or more potentially into this buyer before they ever actually have to commit to anything in a very, very standard sales approach for the size of businesses that are in this group. So really, discovery is the seller saying, am I willing to invest 5 hours? That's half a working day. Well, that's more than half a working day, depends on how hard you work. But that's a lot of time. And if we really break down number of leads coming in, can you actually deal like 5 hours with every single lead that lands? Like, no, and you probably shouldn't, because I won't go through the ratios, but that's definitely later on. But most people won't buy your product. Just if you think about a standard, like world-class SaaS sales org is closing about 40% of their leads. A decent org is closing about 20%. Anything less than 20%, you need a bit of work. But that means, let's say you're at the 20%. That means 4 out of 5 people you talk to won't buy from you. So the myth that discovery is for the buyer, like you've got to flip that around. Discovery is for you as the seller to find those 4 out of 5 as early as you possibly can and get rid of them because they are massive time sinks, and you'll never get rid of all of them. Because even as you go down a pipeline, there's a reason why there's always percentages attached to every stage. Because even as you get towards the end of the pipeline, it still only might be 90% after they've signed a contract that they actually pay. Typically, it should be higher, but I've seen organizations where that signature with very small businesses, people just don't honor it. Could go back a step, like, hey, we send a quote out and like 70% of people come back. Well, yeah, but that means 3 in 10 don't. So just playing the numbers, playing your time, thinking about the ratios, at least in this section, discovery 100% is for you as a seller. But we do tack on the micro demo at the end. The buyer doesn't feel jaded. The last thing is, and this one is, I struggle with how exactly to present this myth. Because what it is kind of, it's similar to the customer is always right, but people think that a sales process should be designed for the buyer to buy, and it kind of is, but discovery isn't. As we talked about, discovery is for the seller. For the buyer, if we're talking in the SaaS world, almost every call to action is book a demo. So buyer turns up to the call, they're expecting to see the software. That's not how they're actually going to buy. They would have to do so much mental gymnastics from our software does this to it solves that problem. If you don't connect the dots for them, they're going to have to do so much mental gymnastics, and you will lose so many deals doing that until you can start working out how to connect the dots to get to the deeper part of it. So this is why I say be a teacher, not a buyer in disguise. What I mean by that is everyone is a buyer. Everyone here, like I recently bought an apartment. Infuriating process dealing with agents until you realize you're not their customer. You're part of the transaction that makes their customer happy, but they are a perfect example of the agent. A good real estate agent is not a buyer, and they turn that around, but you're also not their customer, even if you think you are. Yes, that's why they're a teacher. They're teaching you how to get somewhere. They're teaching you about the property, or they're teaching you, I mean, this is the first time we've ever bought a place. So fortunately, my parents-in-law are real estate agents and they helped a little bit. But interestingly enough, they couldn't turn this around. Super weird. Never seen this before. They couldn't go into like actual buyer mode and answer questions to us as buyers because they've been real estate agents for so long. They stayed in teacher mode. And what I mean by this, just to kind of make that real, is I asked a question like, hey, I can't remember what this question was. This is a story that's ad hoc, but I'm definitely going to add it into this section. It was something along the lines of, hey, when we put in a verbal offer, which is not binding in any way, shape, or form, how should we structure it? Should we tell them we don't have financing? Should we tell them blah, 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 blah? And their response was, as a real estate agent, if you were my buyer, I'd want you to do this. And I'm like, that's nice, but that's not what I asked. What I'm looking for now as a buyer is I'm trying to understand, how do I approach this as a buyer? And they stayed in teacher mode. It's really frustrating. But the cool thing about being a teacher when you're actually selling is you do help connect the dots. A teacher's job is to be at least one page ahead of the student, and only one page ahead. You don't need to be a lot of pages ahead. You just need to be just that little bit further, so you know what the process is that they need to go through. And that's why, like, you need to design your process around what the buyer needs, not what they want, and especially for discovery, because it's your time that you're investing into this person. Are they worth being invested into? All right, let's keep going. Cool. So qualification. As I've said like multiple times already, this is about qualifying people out. You want to make sure, and there's the 5 hours wasted. I did that on the wrong slide. Sorry, guys. But the whole idea is inbound. I've found somewhere around 50% will be crap. 40 to 60, somewhere in that range. Outbound, it depends on when you start tracking. But if you think every cold call that you have should definitely book a meeting, or every meeting that you have should definitely go to the next stage, do that for a month and see how much time you've got left. 5 hours wasted was, we've already been through that example. What I recommend is actually default to qualify out, not qualify in. And this came up in, I did a webinar with a dude who does recruitment services, and he talked about, like, one of his horror stories. One of the worst things he ever did as a salesperson was he was fighting super hard to get this person to qualify in, instead of accepting that there were a number of red flags. Now, there's also a caveat attached to that, which is qualify out at the beginning. Make it super easy for someone to not go through your sales process, so you save yourself the 5 hours. But this flips around the further you get in the sales process. Once they're in, they should be in, and it's really hard for them to drop out of the pipeline. But before they get in there, but when you're still in that kind of discovery qualification phase, and there's 3 questions that you can use to test, and all 3 of these are actually super important, and they're in order for a reason. Do they have the pains we solve? Step 1, like, does this person, will they get value out of our product? Are we the best fit to solve them? Now, what I mean by that is, if you think about, I'm a one-man band these days. I use Google Sheets for a CRM because I don't want to spend any money on something. But at the same time, I'm like, I could use Salesforce. I could set it up. Salesforce is awesome. Is that the best fit for a one-man band? It's not just the financial side of things. That's the last question. But is Salesforce and the amount of effort, time, energy that I'm going to have to put into setting that up, or pay someone to actually do it? Salesforce is not a good fit. And I can give you an example of this. I was talking to, like, a coach's coach earlier in the week, and he basically just said, "Yeah, look, we're not a good fit. You're too early stage in the business." Fine. And the last thing is, are they motivated to solve them, being the pains, at the prices we demand? That's the biggest one. Do they have the pains? Everyone has the pain. Like, let's be honest, your business doesn't exist if most of your market doesn't have a similar pain. Are we the best fit to solve them? Probably. But that's also because we want them to give us money, and we know that we can help them out. But the real question is, flip it around. Are they motivated to solve the pain at the prices we demand? So if you demand, I don't know, 10,000 bucks to solve a problem, but really that problem is only actually causing them 2 hours worth of effort a month. There are people where an hour is worth 5 grand to them, but there's not many of them. So are they motivated? Is the pain strong enough? And it's that perspective, by the way. Motivated is the key word, because it's not about us. buyers do things for their own reasons, not ours as a seller. So we have to think about, does the buyer believe, is the buyer motivated to actually do this for how much we demand? Because if we think about it the other way, like if it was up to us, every person we talk to, whether they need our services or not, would start buying it and start giving us money because we want the money. We have to think about it the other way, and we have to get them to tell us like they are motivated enough to solve them at the prices we demand. If you can't answer any of these three questions, I mean, it's a flow chart. So if they don't have the pain, like move on. If you don't think you're a good fit, again, move on. And if you just they're not motivated, and usually it's pricing based is a good proxy. Doesn't have to be though. Jason Lemkin on LinkedIn has a really common post that he does probably about once a month, where he talks about a SaaS might be 50% cost saving. But then you got to factor in employee time, you got to factor in the changeover, you got to factor in that, hang on, you guys are giving us some massive discounts that prices go up next year. Like it's not always just price, but it's a good proxy. Are they motivated to solve them at the prices we demand? So that's qualification, and it is really, this is what you're actually doing in a discovery call. Let me make that real for you. Give you some methodologies. I love BANT. Most of the sales world hate BANT. I'd say I love it because it's the easiest to learn. It's by far the hardest to master though, because you can't use it directly. You can't just literally say it stands for, by the way, if no one's ever heard of BANT, it stands for budget, authority, need, timing. And you can't literally just ask, hey, do you have the money to buy my product? Because everyone's gonna be like, that's a really weird question. What? So it's the easiest to learn. It's definitely the hardest to master, and you have to ask everything in a kind of roundabout way. That's why a lot of people don't like it. I do, because it's so simple, and really you either have it or you don't. And really what it stands for, budget. Can they afford your product? So you're looking for proxies. As we said before, literally in the last slide, your product's 10 grand. If they're a one-man band, probably not. If they're a multi-billion-dollar company, okay, they probably can, but how do they get the budget approved is the next question. Is their organization in a budget freeze, for example? They can't afford your product if they're not, the company's not willing to spend money. Authority, who can say yes? Because you might be dealing with, I can give you an example. I was speaking to a CEO in Canada a few days ago, and she loved the sales audit that I do for people. And then she turned around and basically said, but I can't ever make spending decisions without the founders involved. She's the CEO, not the founder. So she can't actually say yes. The authority is, who can say yes, and how do you work with that person? If you don't know who the authority is, like qualify out. It's so oh sorry, I've just seen it. Quantify. I've seen a typo. Yeah, this is the first time. I'll get that fixed for the next time we run through this talk. Anyway, back to authority. Who can say yes? Because there's always someone in any organization that can say yes. Bigger it is, the lower the job title. Some organizations, directors have up to like $10,000 they can approve. Other organizations, you have to go to the board to even spend $100 to find out who that is. Need. Like, this is the most obvious one. Do they actually need your product? I know that sounds stupid, but like, how often do we actually sit there and go, hang on, does this person actually need what I'm selling? And it's that last question before, are they motivated to solve the problem? That's where need comes from. And then timing. If you don't have a deadline, if you don't have a reason for them to buy at some point, and a specific timeline, things never get done. Because just by nature, humans want to push things out. I don't know if you guys have ever raised capital or been involved in a VC funding round. The most annoying part of that whole process is every investor will say, yeah, we love it. Come back to us in a month. And one of the reasons they do that is if your business maintains the traction, every month they delay, the product effectively gets cheaper for them. They pay you the same amount of money for a better, more traction, bigger company. So they're always pushing things out. But if you don't have a line in the sand, and that was actually one of Ryan's friends who gave me a really good one for this. He set a VC funding round based on when he was getting married. He told all the VCs, like, I'm getting married, which means I'm taking a couple of weeks off, which means this whole thing's going to die if we don't get it done by this date. and he had a few investors kind of circling. I can't remember if he ended up closing that round, but having a really, really structured, like, this is when we have to buy. And if you can, tie that to something the buyer cares about. So tie that to their quarterly budget processes. Tie that to when they need this live so that they might qualify for the next year's bonus. Doing a deal right now with someone or coaching them through it. Massive publicly listed company, British company. So I think their April to March is their bonus cycle. So we're going to miss this year because the deal hasn't been done, and this is a pretty large multi-six-figure deal. And we're now planning for their budget season, sorry, their bonus season for 2025. How do we get this set up so that if it works, that person gets their full bonus or actually a significant amount more? So timing is all about finding those things to attach it to. If you don't like BANT, which I understand a lot of people don't, there's kind of four more. Spin's pretty good. Gap's pretty good. Medic's not quite a qualification methodology, but it's good if you're doing nothing else. And Spiced from Winning by Design is actually a pretty new one that I've only recently come, well, new to me. It's cool. The thing is, they're all a little bit harder to learn. But I'd say they're probably, Medic especially is a little bit easier to master, but it's more of a deal management. You can use it as qualification. Again, something is always better than nothing when it comes to processes and systems like this. I love BANT because of how simple it is, but you do outgrow it within a couple of years, which is fun. All right, let's flip this around. We've talked all about from a seller's perspective, what do you need out of a discovery call? Let's talk about the buyer side because they matter. So for any purchase to happen, you have to be working with a buyer to answer three main questions. And you have to answer all three of these, and you have to answer them in order. And this whole process starts at discovery because first impressions matter massively. Like, I wish they did, because as humans, it would be so much easier if we get to learn a lot more about people and then start helping them. But first impressions, just psychologically, they're super important. So if we're thinking about the buyer, they have to answer three questions in order, and you have to answer all three of them to actually make a purchase. Why buy anything? And this is the one that people always miss. Whatever they're doing now is probably working well enough. The business still exists. Like, yeah, they might have someone who's massively overworked, but if you're a VP in a multi-billion-dollar company, there's always going to be someone in your organization who's massively overworked, and that's kind of their responsibility to manage their career. So, like, yeah, that sucks for that person, but like, why buy anything? So you've got to answer that as early as possible. It's the most important one. It's the one that everyone misses. Everyone always jumps to why buy. Oh, I got this the wrong way around. Why buy now should be last. Why buy you should be in the middle. So why buy anything? Why buy from you? And why buy now? Why buy from you is why not your competitors or why not your peers? And what I mean by that is let's think back to the CRM example I gave before. I'm pretty happy with a Google Sheet. I don't really need more than that. But there's also a little bit of me that there's a guy named Casey, don't remember his last name, formerly from Bonjoro. Now he's over at Active Campaign, posts really, really good stuff on LinkedIn. And he's starting to talk about how Active Campaign's CRM is really good. And I'm like, I'm kind of getting tempted by that. And my current email provider is ConvertKit, and he kind of attacks ConvertKit fairly regularly as like it's really basic. And it is. There's no real CRM capabilities. I use a sheet for that. So why buy from you? Casey really talks about that a lot, specifically to my problems of like Active Campaign has both the email side and it has the CRM side, and you can actually manage kind of a pipeline through it. So that's really interesting. But remember, I'm actually the CRM side, I'm actually comparing with a Google Sheet, which works. I'm making money, I'm closing deals, it works. So why buy anything? We have to go back and answer that question before why buy you. And that's where it's really the most important thing is why buy anything? Why buy from you is peers and competitors. Why buy now? As we talked about with the VC example, if you don't give people a reason to buy now, they will always delay, and time kills all deals. And the reason why I have this in here, even though this is more of a wholesale pipeline thing, is it all starts with discovery. It all starts with there's one sales rep that I'm working with, and coaching him to kind of get better in his process. Really, really basic product that you either need or you don't, that does some analytics and some tracking for email stuff. And we've changed his entire intro because he was just pitching straight away, and it was like, dude, we don't even know what they want. So what we're actually starting with why buy now. And the first question he's asking, he's basically saying, hey, welcome. Um, if you keep going, I'll be your guide. So like setting up who he is, what he's going to do. The next step is a free trial. Everyone goes to a free trial. Before we jump in, while I have seen similar businesses to yours, every use case is different. Walk me through why you reached out now. That's basically his intro. He uses a bit more words than that, but that's starting to answer, because you need to pull out these 3 questions as early as possible, or you're going to be answering the wrong thing with the prospects. If you can't get to why buy anything, like that's a motivation for them. Why buy you? That's also a motivation for them of like, why not stick with why not stick with ConvertKit and a Google Sheet? Why go to ActiveCampaign once you've got to that, like things are wrong with it? And why buy now? I mean, let's go back to the ActiveCampaign example. I'm probably not going to buy now. There's no burning need for me to do anything. So Casey, through purely his marketing and his LinkedIn stuff, he's answered the first 2. He hasn't answered the third one for me, so I'm not going to take any action. So this is where discovery, you're trying to pull out the things that it would take to motivate these 3 questions. All right, as we talked about, micro demo, micro pitch. Buyers hate discovery. It's true, because it's not about them. And you got to give them something. So that's why the way I structure my discovery calls and the ones that I teach, it's always us with like a little bit of give and take. Then you do the micro demo or the micro pitch. And the reason for that is if you make the end, was it Malcolm Gladwell or one of those professors? Might have been Simon Sinek, might have been Adam Alter. I can't remember who exactly it was. What he talked about is no one goes and sees a movie and is like, man, the beginning of that movie was great, but the ending really sucked. Nobody recommends that movie to people. Flip it around. You might have definitely sat around a dinner table and talked to someone and been like, yeah, look, the beginning's a bit slow, but there's a payoff by the end. Everyone talks about that movie. Everyone talks about that experience. To think about your discovery call as the beginning is more about you, and then you bring it home by making it about the buyer. And what I love with a micro demo, micro discovery, what it is you're going to share one workflow, one very specific workflow. Typically, you'll have this entirely scripted, and like you even have where your mouse moves on the screen scripted if you want to go that far. But this is like fully scripted, and what you're looking for, it's purely to give them something at the end that makes them satisfied that it wasn't a waste of their time. But also, you're seeding the next step. This is the most important stage, to seed the next step. So this is a script that I actually use fairly regularly. And you literally can tell people, like, I don't know if I want to work with you. You don't know if you want to work with me. You're obviously not going to buy our software without seeing it. If you're comfortable after we do this, we're going to book a call or not. This is how you're setting up your BAMFAM. This is how you're setting up, like, is someone going to keep talking to me, or are they going to end it? And that's okay. Like, someone sees your software and just goes, that's the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. They're never going to buy from you if they don't like the look of it to begin with. First impressions matter. But by seeding before you show them anything, what is going to happen afterwards, you can then hold them accountable to that. Hey, we've agreed. Are we going to keep going, or are we going to end it? They can't say, let me come back to you, because that's not a reasonable thing. Well, no, either we're going to do this or we're not. Let me come back to you. You can even tell, let me come back to you. That's no in my language. Typically it's no, but a very polite way of saying no. Is that the same way to you? And you'll find a lot of people like, yeah, actually I am saying no. Cool, it's fine. You've seen it. I've talked to you. We can move on with our lives. Obviously you do a little bit more kind of pushback if it does make sense. But the micro demo is all about the buyer giving them something back so they feel satisfied. That's the talk. I am happy to share these slides because I wrote down like a bunch of tactics that you can use. I have a newsletter that I do every week, and these are all tactics from there. I didn't write one on soft close. I realized as I was putting this together, but these are all tactics you can use inside of an actual discovery call. And then there's also a step-by-step guide